we discuss China and China's involvement in the smuggling, and the exploitation of America's borders, to what extent is this strategy potentially the Chinese government themselves, or is this kind of rogue elements in the Chinese government or a criminal organization? Because I think there's a confusion there. When you say China, people think the Chinese government is planning this, its strategy.
Yeah.
Is it, or is it organizations that are doing that?
I think it's a combination of both. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So there are chemical companies that are owned by the PRC, right? Literally, they are owned by the PRC, and they are exporting large amounts, large quantities of not only precursor chemicals for fentanyl and meth production, but also pure fentanyl to the United States and to Mexico for transport into the United States. The PRC, there's about 160,000, this is a State Department number, 160,000 chemical companies throughout China. It's one of the most unregulated industries in China. And there's literally tens of thousands of sub-brokers in China, right? So you can have a massive production plant and have hundreds of brokers that are buying chemicals from that plant or that company, and then brokering deals back into the United States and back into Mexico as well. So it is a combination of both, Vince, right? So we have seen where you have CCP that they sit on executive boards of some of these really prolific chemical companies that are just sending many, not just fentanyl, but many Schedule 1 drugs into the Western Hemisphere, in particular the United States. We've seen PRC and CCP would give grants and give other award money to chemical companies. The biggest factor, the number one factor in all of this is that we know that the PRC and CCP gives tax rebates to chemical companies to export fentanyl derivatives all throughout the world, but in particular, United States and Mexico, up to 13%. So when you say, is this a government thing versus a criminal element within China? It's really both, right? It's really both, right? And let me elaborate on that a little bit more. When COVID hit in 2020, or early 2020, and Wuhan was locked down in China, we saw an immediate impact here in Mexico and the United States. So the drugs were starting to get stockpiled, movement and flow, logistics slowed down, and the prices of illicit drugs were going up everywhere nationally. So we know that the production of fentanyl in China is a direct correlation to distribution, trafficking and distribution in the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting to know that the Chinese government definitely knows that there is, or almost knows and in support of this illicit drug getting transferred over to Mexico, or even, it kind of goes to show it's almost an idea or a strategy of weakening our own government.
I think it's a combination, and I'll explain this too. There's so much revenue. There's so much revenue. You look at the Chinese government right now. I'm not an expert on their economy, but by no means. But I'll say this: we know that exports, production is the key staple to the Chinese economy, and one of their biggest exports, and they really lead the world in this, is chemicals. And so, the more they are exporting, the more revenue they're generating for China. So there's that piece of it too, right? Does it undermine our society? Yes. Right? Does it disrupt our own economy through black market currency and the moving dark money? Absolutely, it does. I do think it's a combination now.
Yeah, it also almost weakens us internally by creating more addicts and also losing lives to the addiction of fentanyl. One of the questions I asked my last guest was, what is China or China and Mexico, the relationship between each other? What do they get out of it? Does China gets to destabilize America slowly, the cartel makes money, or is there a more layered and nuanced approach to what they're doing?
Well, I think there is. I mean, if you look at Mexico has a role to play in the drug trafficking. Yes, we are focused on China production, but I don't know if you know this, Vince, but I testified before Congress back in April of this year, and I laid out 5 areas that are really kind of areas to focus in on, production in China being one of them, the open ports in Mexico, right? The seaports, Mazatlan, Veracruz, Manzanillo, the labs, the clandestine labs that are real throughout Mexico, obviously the border, and then I talked about social media platforms. So there's key areas where not only Mexico or China, but the United States, in particular in regards to social media platforms, right? We know that is now the vehicle for distribution nationally, right?
Really?
So yes.
Which platforms are those? If you don't, sorry.
Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, like you name it. We see distribution taking place on encrypted applications like Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp. We see funding mechanisms like Cash App, Zelle, Venmo being utilized. So the drug trafficking distribution has evolved too. So our role as Americans, we need to do something about that to safeguard all these people that are succumbing to drug overdoses and poisonings. The other area is the border. And the cartels take full advantage of the border, right? So a group goes here, they'll send drugs the other way, or they'll build tunnels, distract and overcome. That's what they do, and they'll just keep on pushing. Now, they also push a lot of drugs directly through the ports of entry. And CBP does a fantastic job to the degree that they can, but it's never ending. It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
Right. There are ideas for solutions going forward, but I think America has to pivot and take a real serious look at who's involved, who's really upstream. That's really the puppet masters pulling the strings in regards to the entire drug trafficking or illicit drug trafficking industry.
When you say upstream, can you elaborate on that, please?
So we in law enforcement, or my prior career, we are very focused on networks that are selling drugs and recovering the funds from that. We're very focused on what's in front of us. So, for example, DEA, FBI, HSI, Marshals, ATF, very focused on going after the cartels in Mexico. Go after Chapo, go after Mayo, go after the Chapitos, go after Mencho. But who's really behind them, allowing them to exist, right? So you have one of the issues in Mexico is corruption at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. And so that's what I'm referring to, right? So there's that piece that has never been addressed. My hope is that the new president will do that, Sheinbaum. But you never know. And in regards to China, it's similarly, what's the real issue behind why China? China in May of 2019, Vince, they regulated all variations of fentanyl, but yet they still are subsidizing up to 13% tax rebates to their own companies to export fentanyl into Mexico and the United States. So on one hand, public, they're saying, look, we're controlling fentanyl. On the other hand, they're giving tax rebates to thousands of companies to export it.
It's fascinating.
Right.